Not technically first day but second day. When I was 20 or so I got hired to be a temporary floor member for Forever 21 during the holiday season. My training started a week before Black Friday, so the store was already kind of in chaos. On my first day of training I walked in and the floor manager gave all the new hires a tour showing us the facility and layout of the store. After this I was assigned to a veteran floor member to shadow and get an idea of what my job was and what my duties would be. As soon as I was assigned, the manager dipped, never to be seen again. An hour and a half into my shift my shadowee got an emergency family call and had to take off for a week. When this happened I found some other floor manager and explained the situation and asked them who else I should shadow. The manager's response was, just do what you can by yourself, you'll be fine. Everyone else is busy. Figured, well, okay, I'll try. I don't know if any of you have shopped in the women's section of Forever 21, but during seasonal sales they will have multiple articles of clothing that all look almost exactly the same but with slight differences. A white cardigan with 4 buttons that look literally the same as a white cardigan with 5 buttons. The best part was these different items were often placed in completely separate parts of the store, and it was the job of the dressing room to return the unpurchased items to the correct section so the employees could put them back on the shelves. Well, these employees fucking sucked, and I didn't know if they were a part of my section or not, so I'd spend a ridiculous amount of time trying to find where they go before realizing, wait, this isn't even my section. I've checked literally every rack, so I'd put it back on the sorting rack and move to the next item. More than 50% of the stuff I was told to reshelf wasn't my section. I just did as best as I could and got ready for my next miserable day. The next day I come in and the store manager pulls me to her office and tells me how slow I was the day before and if I want to keep working here I need to be very fast. I explained my lack of training and unfamiliarity with the store, and she told me if I didn't know where the clothes were in sections I should come in my free time and memorize where stuff was at. I spent the rest of my shift putting clothes in random fucking places. They never came back for a third shift. Fuck that place and their management.
I used to work at a craft store as a cashier, but quit when I moved. Ended up going back a couple years later to make some extra cash, but this time in the framing department. During the interview they swore up and down I would only ever be a backup cashier because I said I refused to have full cashier shifts. First shift after interview is listed as framing, but I'm put on cash and told that actually most of my shifts would be cash since they'd found someone else for framing. I spent the next 6 hours giving everyone who came to my register 20% off of everything and then never went back.
My first internship was at a Brazilian teen detention center. It's akin to a prison, but Brazilian law has some distinctions between crimes committed while as an adult or as a teenager. Teens go through socio-educational measures. I was walking through a courtyard with my supervisor when some doctors came running, flailing their arms and screaming, while officers came running from the opposite direction. I get pulled by my supervisor, who just tells me to run back to our office. These teens as young as 12 had escaped their block. A few minutes later an officer comes knocking on the doors of the offices and yelling for everyone to run outside because a fire had broken out. Some of the teens had set mattresses on fire in their cells. I didn't really know about. My teacher did. She hadn't even been there that day. So I was forced by the university to choose another place to intern at. Oh well.
Wasn't exactly the first day, but I didn't show up after the second shift. It was a rather popular cafe chain in my country. I was hired to work in the kitchen as a cook along with another senior cook. Let's put aside the fact that I had zero cooking knowledge whatsoever. The senior cook was leaving the kitchen every 5 minutes to smoke. So there I am, alone in the kitchen. Orders are printing fast, and I'm standing there not sure what to do first, and the waitress comes over yelling at me to cook shit I don't have any business cooking, definitely not on my own. Later on the senior cook told me they had at least 2 rats running around the kitchen, showed me they pooped on a plate. I never came back and I'm glad the place got shut down.
When I burned my hands all night on the 2 hot plates as a food runner, they wouldn't let me use towels to carry them and said I just had to get used to it. Nope.
I was 17 and working precast concrete, refused to use a rusted to shit ladder. Supervisor called me a pussy, got up about 7 rungs before his foot went through one, heard his foot snap as he fell. I called an ambulance and walked to my car in the parking lot.
I was a cashier at Lowe's during college for less than a full day. I made it through the multiple date training, but there was so much stupid shit going on I almost thought I was on a hidden camera show. All of the employees complained about how hard they had to work while simultaneously not getting enough hours. Nobody understood why they were hiring like 4 new people, I was one of those 4. Turns out it's because they were progressing through a sexual harassment complaint that required restructuring of the store and firing of some employees. This was known to HR and explained to new hires, against company policy, but wasn't known to the employees, apparently some of whom still worked there, including the fucking person doing the training. She was really inappropriate and said not to worry about the sexual harassment stuff, that everything would go back to normal soon enough and we wouldn't have to be so uptight. They fired her the day before I started, along with one of the cashiers who trained me. She also offered me terrible guidance for the application process. They were looking for part-time help and 2 of the 3 days they needed help on I had off from school. I told them I could work nights most nights, but if they needed daytime help it had to be on those days. She said if I was too restrictive they wouldn't keep me on. Lied to my boss about my availability to make me even more attractive than I already was, wink, and told me to schmooze them a bit and I'd make it further. She said in the end it wouldn't impact anything, and I'd get those days. My first week's schedule I was working mornings every day that I was in school, and I wasn't given any hours on my days off. Aside from the fact that I was given 2 times the hours the position called for, when other employees were shorted. My work schedule was literally impossible to consolidate with my school schedule. I only went to work on my first day to tell them I was quitting and that their application process was a fucking mess. They couldn't figure out how so much went wrong and then they asked who trained me and everything made sense. They thanked me for at least showing up to quit, unlike the other 3 they hired, who just stopped returning their calls and no-showed their first days.
On the first day of working at Amazon warehouse, the managers broke down to everyone how a 15-minute break works there. Walking to the break room is 2.5 minutes, 10 minutes of actual break and then 2.5 minutes to go back to your stations. It took me 2.5 minutes to walk to my car and I took a forever break.
Summer job working for a landscape architect. Got to the job site and he asked me to dig a hole in some rocky dirt. I asked for a shovel. He didn't have one. I asked for a hand spade. He didn't have one. He told me to just dig the hole with my bare hands and then he drove off to another site, leaving me completely alone. I dug for a little bit and then said fuck this and left. And the job specified that I needed to supply my own tools. I could have, but it didn't, and I wasn't going to work for somebody that expected folks to dig through hard, rocky soil with their hands.
My first ever job. I was 13 and I would be delivering phone books from the back of a van through people's letterboxes, so I'd be in the back of the van with the phone books and there was an older guy driving slowly while I went back and forth to the van/houses with the books. At one point the van was getting quite empty, so there was more space to move around and we had finished the delivery in the street we were paid to deliver to and he drove to another. While driving there he drove, let's say, aggressively, and I fell inside the back where the books were. I wasn't sitting in a seat as the van had no seats in the back. As I put my hand out to steady myself I accidentally laid it across a portable radio that had its antenna extended, but the antenna was also broken halfway and razor sharp. It sliced the palm of my hand clean open 3 to 4 inches. I can only describe what I saw as gruesome. I said to him to pull the van over and I needed help. He saw my hand and just threw me a plastic bag, the kind you'd get at a supermarket, and told me to wrap my hand in it. Then, he continued with the deliveries. At least he delivered the remaining books himself. I should have been taken to a hospital or at least home to my parents. I quit after that and never showed up again. As you can imagine, my parents were quite angry at him.
2 times. Once I applied for and got a telemarketing job. I didn't know what it entailed. After an hour I knew it was a terrible fit. Auto-dialing people during their dinners. Trying to sell them stuff they didn't want. Reading a horrible script while sitting in a soulless gray cubicle. I got up, went to the manager, apologized and said it wasn't a good fit for me. He seemed understanding. Another time I attended a Make Easy Money at this job seminar and it turns out it was selling knives door to door. I'd if I technically quit or just noped out at the end of it.
I noped out of an interview one time, thanked them at the end and said it wasn't for me. Those interviewing, management level folks, started arguing with each other in front of me during the interview. I figured, if this is the vibe at the management level, then I sure as hell don't want to be your employee.
Answered an ad in the paper. This was the mid-90s, what seemed to be an office job making sales calls when I was in college. Did a phone interview and was called back for an in-person interview. When I go to the interview, I'm led into a room with about 50 other people and a small stage at the front of the room. We're all somewhat confused as to what is going on. Finally, a guy gets on the stage and informs us that we've been selected for the opportunity to sell Cutco. Me and 2/3 RDs of the rest stood up and walked out.
Restaurant, swept under my station when we were closing. Giant brown pile came out with broom from under lowboy fridge. Pile began to scatter. It was hundreds of roaches, never returned.
A long time ago, not long after getting my papers as a chef, I had an interview at a hotel for a position in the kitchen. The executive chef and I chatted in his office for about 20 minutes. At the time I remember him coming off as very arrogant, which is quite common in this field. I didn't think much of it at the time as the pay was decent and the shift was what I wanted. As I was leaving his office, I turned to leave through the dining room, the way I had come in, which was closed at the time. It was another hour or so before service started, and he says to me, "No, not that way. Go through the kitchen. You're not good enough to go through the dining room." I was so surprised by what he said, I just did what he asked without a word. Later on, after I had got home, I phoned him up and said that after having a close look, I decided that his menu wasn't good enough and that I wouldn't be accepting his offer.
Restaurant line chef. Worked a 12-hour shift. Was given 2 breaks of about 10 to 15 minutes each. Burned my hand numerous times because they gave me plates that came right from the oven and never said a word. End of the shift, I told the head chef I was done. He called me soft and said I was the 3rd person to quit on him after a day. I said maybe it's the way you treat people.
Got what was supposed to be a prestigious political internship that came with a security clearance and everything. Found out at orientation that the part-time internship was really 40 to 60 hours, unpaid, and that no intern had gone on to work with the organization and weren't really given a leg up for other federal posts. We were supposed to facilitate meetings with heads of state, coordinate conferences, and assist the actual employees with composing published research papers for which we would not be credited. They were definitely drinking their own Kool-Aid, so I bounced right on out of there.
I got hired at a very small knockoff dollar store in an old, failing mall. The owner was foreign with a very thick accent. He told me I'd get an hour but neglected to mention it was under the table. I spent about an hour stocking the very overly cluttered shelves before I was told to get more chips out of the back storage area. I walked back there and there's about a dozen men sitting on boxes all crammed into a small back room. I asked where the chips were and these guys all glared at me. They started speaking in another language and rapidly motioned towards me. Then one guy got up and asked what I needed. I told him I was supposed to get a box of chips and he got a box out of the pile and handed it to me. The entire time these guys are all staring at me. Everything back there looked shady as all hell and it was very uncomfortable. A while later I had to use the restroom, which was also in the back. These guys all just wordlessly glared at me while I went into the woman's restroom. While I was in the restroom, someone tried to open the door. I was the only woman there. The owner told me he wanted me to come back that night late in the evening well after the mall closed. I didn't show up. I came in the next morning and lied about why I couldn't work there. He still gave me the few bucks from what little time I did work. I don't know what in the hell that guy had going on there and I didn't want to find out. Edit. Forgot to add in the best part. I was 18 and this was supposed to have been my first job.
I answered an ad for a babysitting job. I was already working on a casual basis, but it was sporadic, so I thought some after-hours babysitting would be welcome extra cash. The couple were both in the military and proceeded to tell me that I would be staying in the spare room and looking after their 6-month-old child around the clock as well as doing the housework. I would have 1 day off every 2 weeks. They said it is cash in hand so I could sign on to the dole unemployment benefit, to make up the rest of the money. I left on the spot. They wanted a live-in housemaid and nanny, not a babysitter, and they were not able to pay for one. Why they thought it was up to me to illegally collect the dole to subsidize them, I don't know.
Applied for a job at my longtime favorite restaurant, celebrated my birthday there every year. Owner asks me to come in for basically a tryout. As I communicated, I was looking at other job possibilities. I come in and they just stick me on dishwashing for an hour. No biggie. Then their dishwasher doesn't show up. So the kitchen manager asks me to stay one for their lunch rush, so I'll get paid for the hours. I do, Kitchen staff was nice, so I was happy to help out even though I figured I'd be taking a different job. I fill out a time card at the end of the shift and tell the manager I probably wouldn't be back. He understands and thanks me for the help. Fast forward a couple weeks and he tells me to email the owner after I ask him if I should pick up my measly paycheck. I do. She basically tells me to fuck off over text. Tells me it was staging and that she told me I wouldn't be paid. I respond that I understand that, but that I stayed an extra 3 hours which I was told I'd be paid for. She stops responding. I decide I want to be petty over the $40, so I get the stat labor department involved. Dude goes in there and makes her pay me for the hours including the first staging hour. Couple weeks later I got my $40. Never went back to that restaurant. Edit. Firstly, petty is not how I see it 2 years later. I'm very glad I did this, and sharing the story with others in my city I learned this practice was very common with local restaurants. Hopefully others learn to stand up for their labor too from my small experience. Secondly, this restaurant closed down a couple weeks after I got that paycheck. The owner made a long-winded complaint on the FB page about how the food culture had changed in the city and her restaurant didn't fit in anymore. Total bullshit. They were always popular. Most people theorized the terrible mismanagement and employee abuse had caught up to her.
I was a waitress, the only waitress, at a just opened diner. The boss didn't have me sign any paperwork. Everything was under the table. But that wasn't what made me quit at the end of the night. In order to get me where he wanted me to go, he would pinch my skirt at my upper thigh. Not quite the butt but very close, and pull me around like it was a leash. Needed me in the kitchen? Rather than call me, he would come out, pinch my skirt and pull to the kitchen. Needed me at the cash machine? Again, come over to wherever I was, didn't matter if I was serving a customer, and would grab my skirt to pull me. That act in itself made some customers uncomfortable. Mind you, one couple left an almost 50% tip in the end. But I think it was more out of pity and embarrassment on my behalf. I was supposed to come in the next day, but I called that night and said the job wasn't for me. I came in a couple days later to turn in my apron and he just took a wad of cash out of his pocket and paid me then and there. God, he was creepy. I think it was a smart move to quit.
Had an orientation for an alarm company. Next day manager calls and says don't worry about going into the office and to meet at Planet Hollywood. They like to get to know the employees better over lunch. Next day I go into the office and another employee whom I had not met says you must be Scandal 929. I was like huh? They responded light-skinned. Pretty boy is how the manager described me. In same conversation I found out no one else had ever been invited for a get-to-know-you lunch. I'm out.
When the microwave in the lunchroom was coin activated.
I was hired to be a waitress, which has a lower hourly wage due to tips. The entire shift they had me wash dishes in the sink, but paid me waitress wages. A few months later the restaurant was investigated for a number of fraud activity.
It was a small independent insurance agency in 2006. My first day there, the owner, a true fossil, said email and fax were strictly forbidden as he only believed in communication in person, by phone, or through mail. Left for lunch and never went back. I couldn't imagine the inefficiency I'd have dealt with had I stayed. They ultimately closed their doors, so it was definitely the right decision.
I interviewed for a professional marketing assistant and got the job straight away. I was under the impression that I would be an assistant to the man I was interviewed by. When I showed up for my first day, the same waiting room I was in the previous day was full of people. I quickly learned that we were all hired, and that I would be a door-to-door salesperson selling some pretty useless shit. I spent my entire day inside a Starbucks applying for other jobs and went home, got paid, but never went back.
Gas station. The manager gave me a weird vibe. I made it through the first day but didn't go back. Found out later he cornered another girl in the back of the store and she had to fight her way out. Trust your gut.
Salesman for Kirby Vacuums. First sale call was to a single elderly woman who was supporting her son in hospital. They got us in the door by offering a free carpet clean as a demonstration. The supervisor training me pushed and pushed to make the sale until this old woman was in tears. Just as she was about to sign the paperwork, I asked if she actually wanted to vacuum and she said it was lovely but she couldn't afford it. I took the paperwork away from her and said not to worry. Outside I told the supervisor I quit, to which he replied I would have been fired anyway. No love lost. I hung around for half an hour playing on my phone to make sure the supervisor left because he was a real piece of work.
I wasn't the person, but I was training a new guy at a movie theater. A customer asked for extra butter. She was nice and normal, not a mean or rude customer. The kind I would pay to handle all day long. He puts the popcorn tub down, says I'm going to the bathroom, takes off his apron and walks out the front door and never came back.
Worked in a hotel for a day. No one told me where anything was. Got chewed out for it. Guests enjoying their meals told me to pay no mind / I was doing a good job and that my boss is a cunt. I told the manager that I was quitting and wouldn't be doing the next shift. I arrived the next day, returning a work uniform, and my supervisor approached me and yelled at me for being late. I told her I already quit, but if I was working, technically I was 5 hours early for my shift. Absolute nutcases.
It was my first day at Five Guys. It was around 10:30 p.m. and they told me it was time to clock out, despite not having finished closing. I then worked until almost midnight. I did not return.
It was a petrol station and the manager wanted me to work for free until I had learned their computer systems to what he deemed a satisfactory extent. I agreed to do it, because I needed a job, and he brought me in at 7 a.m. on my first day. However, he was not present to go through the training with me, so I was just standing around kind of helping out on the forecourt but not really knowing what I should be doing. Not learning anything. After about an hour and a half without the manager showing up or anyone training me on anything, I decided that I wasn't going to continue to be taken advantage of and told the cashier to pass on the message to the manager that I had quit.
Worked at McDonald's years ago in their assistant manager training program, had gotten hired right out of the army. First day I met with the store manager where I'd be working and training and noted that she spent majority of the time doing entry-level work and then working out to do store manager work. She told me this was pretty common because of the type of people they'd hire. Her office was a counter and she told me she had bought a chair but corporate made her remove it. She was really nice, worked her ass off and was intelligent and told me she'd been at McDonald's for 10 years. I imagined working my ass off only to be told I couldn't have a chair and decided that night I wasn't going to work for a company like that.
My first day working at EB Games, I was super excited to be there. The first half of my shift was basically tidy up the shelves. It was a high traffic location, so the shelves always need tidying. After 5 hours of following kids around and putting things away, I go on break. When I come back, my manager is standing in his strangely empty store absolutely aghast, staring at a huge steaming pile of shit on the carpeted floor. Apparently a homeless person had walked in. Without saying a single word, he dropped True and emptied his bowls. My boss at me and says, "Oh good, you're back, just in time. Clean that up. I'm going for lunch." I laughed at him and told him, "You can't be serious. I'm not going near that." He responds with, "It's your job. I'm taking a break. I want it gone before I get back." I told he's going to have to deal with it on his own because I don't need this job that bad. So I quit. I grabbed my coat and went home. 1 week later, the district manager calls me up to apologize and offer me my job back.
Young and naive right out of college, took a marketing job. My interview was great. Nothing shady seemed to be going on and no immediate red flags. After 4 hours of training, my first day consisted of going door to door in a suburban town trying to sell cable to older people. We were told to dress for business, so I'm hiking around for miles in my best skirt, suit jacket and heels. Hours were from 9 to 5, but we didn't get back to the business until well after 10 p.m. Not to mention, the person I was shadowing was able to make a sale to an older gentleman who seemed to have memory issues. I noped the fuck right out of there.
Electronics store. My first day we had to attend a class where they teach people how to upsell folks. Basically walked you through ignoring what they ask you for and using their ignorance of the equipment against them. I thought that was really scuzzy. Then they went on to tell us about a commission-style bonus program that basically forced employees to upsell everyone. When we took the break for lunch that first day, I peaced out and went home. Never got paid for those 4 hours. But I never regretted bouncing on that.
I was hired at a chain restaurant to be a hostess. I was so excited because my last job was washing dishes, and because of my eczema, I had to quit. It was too painful to do that job, so I arrived at my new job dressed up to be a hostess, and those mfers took me back to the kitchen to do dishes because the dishwasher just quit. I noped out of there real fast.
They hired me to work full-time. I had interviewed to work full-time. I was trying to quit a horrible job, and this job was on the other end of town. I needed enough money for the bus pass, and to make up the difference and more of quitting my old job, they hired me and showed me my schedule. I showed up for my first day. Things are going good. Then my manager called me in, sat me down, and explained that they'd have to cut me down to 15 hours a week because they'd hired too many fucking people. I explained, painfully, that I had to take a bus an hour each way and wouldn't be able to pay rent or food after that. He said I could always hold out and hope people quit. I told him he could start with me, took off my apron and stormed out in tears.
I have worked in construction-type jobs my whole life. The amount of angry abusive assholes you encounter are endless. This one dickhead still has the title. This was in the 90s, so he has stood the test of time. A friend quit this job and gave my number to his asshole boss he had, without my knowledge. I never did thank him for that. This guy calls me out of the blue and asks if I need work. I said I did. He said he could pick me up the next morning. I said I have my own car, I could meet him on site. He yells and says he will pick me up. I was floored that this idiot was yelling at me 2 minutes after talking to me. I gave him my address and he said he would be there at 6:30 the next morning. At 5 inches colon 30 the next morning this asshole is calling asking, "Where the fuck is your house?" No hello, no good morning, just full on screaming. I said if he would stop yelling I would give him directions. He starts yelling again, so I hang up. He calls right back and is losing it because I hung up on him. I tell him to fuck off and not even bother to show up. The 2 other guys I lived with were now awake and not too happy with me. I explain what happened and they just go back to bed. About 30 minutes later I am awakened by the sound of a horn blaring outside our house. We lived on a farm, so luckily the next neighbor was half a mile away. My roommates once again wake up and they are livid. We all go outside and this asshole is yelling at us to get in the truck because we're late. He's there a half an hour earlier than he said he would be. He also doesn't know who is who because he just spoke to me on the phone. I'm about to tell him to fuck off again, but my buddy walks up to the truck and says he wants to get paid up front. This guy lets loose a tirade on my buddy. My buddy just laughs in his face. He says if you're going to be an asshole he will have to pay him first. The guy just keeps yelling. My buddy says he will be out in a minute and he better have his money ready. We all go back in the house and watch this guy wait in his truck. He's there about 5 minutes and starts blowing the horn. We just laugh and poke our head out the door and say we'll be there in a minute. He keeps blowing the horn. We just ignore him. After another 10 minutes he bangs on the door. I open the door and this fool is about 5 feet 2 inches and maybe 200 pounds. I am shocked by his appearance. He's just about to say something and I say, "Didn't I tell you to fuck off and not bother coming here?" He is truly confused. He asked where's the other guy? I said he was just fucking with you. I'm the guy you were talking to. Now fuck off. He says, "So you're going to fuck me up and not come to work?" I was amazed what an asshole this guy was. I said you got to pay me up front first. He starts yelling and swearing again. I slam the door in his face. He starts banging on the door like a madman. I finally have enough and get a hockey stick and chase him back to his truck. It was pretty funny watching him run. He backs out of the driveway and threatens he'll get me for this. He still is the biggest asshole I have ever met.
Shared tips based on seniority. Nope.
I didn't quit, but it was an interview many years ago. The position was for an admin assistant. I got to the place and it was in the back of a strip mall, kind of. Just a small parking lot in a forest. I go into interview and the guy tells me it is in fact not an admin position but an alarm system cold calling position. I immediately knew he was wasting my time and but finished it out. He told me there would be a lot of evenings just him and I working. I don't think so. He also said that he loves to reward his team for good sales and always takes them to Mexico. I walked out and told my husband, BF at the time, there was no way I was taking that. I got a call for a second interview but never picked up the phone. So sketch.
Warehouse job. Putting stickers on file folders or some such garbage seemed pointless and the floor was just a mass of these same stickers. So they were either falling off constantly or people were shirking work by emptying their quota onto the floor. Went to ask the boss a question. Found him asleep in an empty office. He'd taken off a sock and had draped it over his eyes to block out the light. On my way out the door, The other girl who had started that day said, "Please come back. Don't leave me alone here." I couldn't stop laughing.
Like all these jobs in here are service-based jobs, yet people can't seem to figure out why the service industry isn't coming back to work.
It was a sandwich shop in college. I got the flu before my first day, told them I was sick. They said come in anyway, it's just training. Then they had me making sandwiches. No gloves, runny nose, coughing and everything. I left in under an hour and didn't eat there again. Fuck that.
I technically quit before my first day. I got hired at a well-known gift store. I was hired with the understanding that I would work Saturdays, Sundays, a grand total of 8 hours a week, so 2 4-hour shifts. Also at minimum wage. Not a problem with me. Done that before. I would just pick up a part-time job for rest of the week. Nope. Apparently that wasn't allowed. The manager thought that was a horrible thing and disrespectful to her. I should only work for them and only them, and I should have better control over my money if I can't survive on 4 a week before taxes. Yeah. Didn't show up cause fuck that noise. She called pissed off that I wouldn't show up to such a opportunity.
Guy was unloading a skid steer, a bobcat, off the trailer and didn't have his bucket in the right position, so he began to tilt backwards. As I took a big step back to avoid getting crushed, the other guy outside the bobcat actually stepped forward and put his hands up to try and prevent the several thousand-pound machine from tipping over. It didn't end up tipping over, but I decided I was too smart to work for the place and I didn't want to get injured by my colleagues' buffoonery.
It was a waitress gig for a local restaurant. I finished my first day, then was told that training would continue for 6 weeks. While I was in training, all of the tips I got had to be given to my trainer. I was being paid less than an hour. I called the next day and said it wasn't gonna work out.
My very first job was at a little drive-in restaurant close to my high school. I showed up to work the first day. The lady said I had to pay her $0 for training. She showed me around the place and said that my pay would be $0.50/hour as a car hop. This was in 2010, and all the tips I made went into a bucket with all the other girls' tips. At the end of the night, she counted up tips, kept 20% for herself and split the rest up evenly among every employee. Also, part of our job was 1 day a week we had to spend 4 hours cleaning her house. It seemed super shady. I literally left after listening to her go over all these rules. My dad was pissed until I explained, and another girl confirmed and my dad agreed I did the right thing.
Had 2 interviews to work housekeeping at a hospital. Got a call the night of the second interview at around midnight from the guy saying, "I was just so excited I wanted to call and tell you I'm gonna call you to offer you the job tomorrow." Should have taken that as the first red flag, but I needed the job. I go in for my first day of training and he has printouts of my Facebook wall and my boyfriend's. He started asking me how long we had been together and made it clear he knew everything so not to lie to him. It was so uncomfortable. I leave his office and do some training. We break for lunch and he sits with me in the cafeteria asking how it's been going so far, etc., and tells me he expects to see me at his church Sunday. I haven't gone to church in like 10 years at this point. We all have a quick meeting in our main room and I stay back after everyone had left. I put my badge, keys and walkie on the desk and walk the fuck out. I felt bad, but it was no wonder why they can't keep anyone. Called me for months afterwards asking what had happened. He was worried sick. Deserves answers. Blah blah blah. I had called their HR the day after I had walked out to tell them I quit and why, so they had to have told him. He had no reason to keep contacting me. Edit. Thought I'd give a smidgen of more info in case anyone was worried still. I saw a couple people guessing which religion, and yes, he was Mormon. I had grown up around a lot of Mormons, so I never thought this was a normal thing for them, and I know it's definitely not for all of them. This happened over 7 years ago. At the time, I was 20 and pretty naive. I was more concerned with finding a job to keep my apartment than I was thinking about escalating this. I had another part-time job at the time, too. I told that boss about this and he pulled some strings and got me in full-time. I still have this job and love it. It's where I met my husband too. Actually, the hospital's HR person comes in my store a lot and she's really sweet. I think he hasn't been with the hospital for a few years now.